this might be a little dangerous.
By the way, Cadet, we get paid by the job, not by the hour. Let's go.
It's taken me a while to get around to playing this, and as a big Ghostbusters fan, it should have been high up on the list of things to play. Well, that's not strictly true, as I did try and give it a go before the remaster came out, but it just got lost in the shuffle of games I was playing at the time.
My parents didn't believe in toys.
I'm pretty certain that if I didn't give Ghostbusters another go, it would have ended up on the pile of games that had been played for a little bit but never got completed, and I thought as a fan I owe it to myself to give it another go.
I'll tell you something about myself. I come home from work to my place, and all I have is my work. There's nothing else in my life.
Dr.
I meet you, and I say, my God, there's someone with the same problem I have.
Yes, we both had the same problem, you.
Thankfully, the second time round I managed to get through it, ignoring all other distractions. So I'm feeling pretty good that I managed to save one game from ending up on the half-assed attempt pile. Now before I start the review, I'm going to go off on a somewhat relevant tangent, because while I was playing Ghostbusters, the video game, I remembered that I stupidly bought Sanctum of Slime a long time ago. For those who don't know what that is, Sanctum of Slime is a terrible generic twin-stick shooter with a Ghostbusters skin slapped on it. So remembering I was stupid enough to pay real money for it, I thought why not punish myself by playing it again. Maybe that way I will learn not to waste money on crap games. But I got far less than I bargained for, as I found out that I have to buy it again for some reason. Curious to see if this was an isolated case, I checked some of my other games, and found out that the same thing has happened with Far Cry Blood Dragon. I can only wonder how many other games have slipped through the cracks. What can I do about it? Nothing, because as far as Xbox is concerned, I never bought them.
Give me back my money!
I brought this up mainly to make people aware that this does happen, but because I have pretty much lost a tenner between these two games, and I might as well moan about it on a video that very few people watch. But it might make me feel a bit better.
Alright, showtime. We wear him out, then we capture him. That's what your proton stream is for.
Right, moving on with reviewing Ghostbusters the video game, or as I sometimes call it, Ghostbusters Here We Go Again. You could consider the game as the third movie that we never got, which is pretty much what Dan Aykroyd said.
The story of the game is a sequel to the first film. We are back with the Ghostbusters to wrap up some loose ends, which are left open after we destroy Gozer the Destructor. Gozer comes back again in the form of the Stay Puft Man because its character selector is locked, so again Gozer gets its white arse handed to it with a one-way ticket back to its dimension. I imagine this time when Gozer went back licking its wounds, it finally decided enough was enough and just gave up on the whole idea of taking over Earth. And I wouldn't blame it, because let's be honest, what real chance did it have of defeating an American city while walking around as an all-you-can-eat marshmallow? I'm now going to pass you on to Egon and the gang, who are going to fill us in on who is disturbing the dead this time to gain ultimate power over our mortal realm.
Something terrible is about to enter our world, and this building is obviously the door. The architect's name was Ivo Shandor. I found it in Tobin's Spirit Guide. He was also a doctor, performed a lot of unnecessary surgery. And then in 1920, he started a secret society.
Let me guess. Gozer worshippers.
Right.
No studying.
After the First World War, Shandor decided that society was too sick to survive. And he wasn't alone. He had close to 1,000 followers when he died. They conducted rituals up on the roof. Bizarre rituals intended to bring about the end of the world, and now it looks like it may actually happen.
So basically in the game we're dealing with the head of the arse-kissing occult to Gozer. I'm not going to cover any more of the story because I think it's worth checking out if you're a Ghostbusters fan. What I will say about it is that the story does trace in many of the footsteps left from the first film, so much so that I did have to double check a few times to see if the game was a direct tie-in. In honesty, I didn't really think much of the story on my first playthrough, because I felt it repeated too much from the film. It's why I sometimes refer to it as Ghostbusters Here We Go Again. But a strange thing happened during my second playthrough. I got much more invested in the story, and I think there's two reasons for this. The first is that I sat and watched both films one after the other, then started playing the game again, and the second reason is I put the game on the professional difficulty. The reason why upping the difficulty got me more invested in the story was because the game obviously posed more of a challenge. Naturally, because I was putting in more effort, I felt like I was more rewarded by the cutscenes. So I paid more attention to them, picking up on details I missed the first time round. Upping the difficulty also got me more invested in the gameplay, because the ghosts have a higher hit counter, so there is actually a reason for exploiting a ghost's weakness. While I was looking up ghost weaknesses, I took time out to read up on the trivia about them, whereas on normal I didn't have to bother because shooting any ghost with any old thing would do. This meant that on professional I had a little more to think about, because you see it's easy to get through most of the game on normal by sticking with the blast stream and the bosun dart. The blast stream is the first weapon you get and the bosun dart is the alternative firing mode for it, which you get a little bit later on. Basically the bosun dart is an RPG, you can easily one-shot groups of trash mobs with it and it does decent damage to everything else. So the only real reason you would use any other weapons is just to see what they're like, with the exception of the slime gun because this has a tether that's needed to complete puzzles. Now on my first playthrough I felt a little bit let down as I expected the game to have its own standalone story. However, because the story was tied into the first film and took many sequences from it, I kinda felt that it was lazy reusing material, and as I was playing through the game I just felt like there was few ideas left.
If everything you're doing is bad, I want you to know this.
I initially cynically thought that maybe Aykroyd and Ramis knew this and decided let's just cash in the minimal story we have and put it into a licensed game, because there's certainly no way of cashing in on the story with Ghostbusters 3. However, after completing it a second time I realised that what they'd done is pretty smart for the situation they're in, because this being a Ghostbusters game with a decent budget behind it, people would naturally expect to be able to play through the iconic parts of the film with the iconic ghosts. If they couldn't, then most people would feel let down, so to give the fans what they want, an original story that would be detached from the films had to be sacrificed. Is that such a bad thing? Ultimately no, because the story does flesh out a lot of the lore of the Ghostbusters universe, like what happened on the 12th floor of the hotel, and why the librarian is clearly crying out for help by consistently stacking books the wrong bloody way. The game also does add new ghosts that in fairness don't really have a chance of being as iconic as the ghosts from the films, but they're interesting enough for the purpose of the storyline. Conveniently enough, giving people what they want has allowed the story to straight up copy and paste from the film, which comes off a bit uninspired and feels like it's taken advantage of fans' expectations. But at the end of the day it works because it delivers that nostalgia kick for fans while offering an expansion on the first film. And let's be honest, this is the best Ghostbusters game by a long shot.
This is my wasted childhood you're looking at.
So I won't criticise the story too much for being a bit underwhelming, because this game is the only one that has delivered what the fans have always wanted from a Ghostbusters game.
That's enough about the story, let's move on to what people probably care about more. Is the ghostbusting good? Kinda. It's just another third person shooter, but in a Ghostbusters skin. Pretty much what you would expect. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's nothing particularly special about it either.
One of the issues I have with the game is that it rarely builds up atmosphere before busting ghosts. This is mainly due to the developers throwing in trash mobs. I'd imagine out of fear that people would get bored if they didn't have something to constantly shoot at. But all the trash mobs do is dilute the game to feel more like a generic third person shooter rather than a Ghostbusters game. At times I would let out a sigh because I just wanted these trash mob shootouts to be over with. Not only did they not add anything to the game, but they ruined most opportunities for the game to build atmosphere and suspense. They are just simply there to give you something to shoot in between the more interesting ghosts. And because of this I was kind of thankful that the game was short. It probably worked in its favour, as I would be more annoyed if it was longer, only offering more increasingly difficult trash mobs. I managed to wrap the game up in about 7 hours. For most of that time I was running around firing darts at everything, including the large variety of destructible objects. Mainly because there is an achievement for causing $3 million worth of damage, but also if there's shit that can be destroyed I'm gonna do it. However, there's a few levels where destroying everything is a good idea because things can get in your way, so it's best to destroy everything in order to give you maximum room for dodging and moving around. I thought trapping ghosts was pretty good, though at times it felt like it was just adding another layer to the proceedings, only delaying getting rid of the thing I would usually kill, especially when they get caught on or behind things. As you can see, sometimes slamming ghosts makes things harder, because it makes them bounce all over the place.
I've got a hold on it. You've got it!
Like this little bastard. Just get in the frickin' trap already.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me, you're stuck behind the wall now? For fuck's sake.
But I mainly blame the trash mods for making capturing ghosts sometimes feel tedious. I think the best example of the game hitting its stride is on the library level, on the sections where you're moving about in the dark. You get to slowly creep round looking for ghosts in anticipation of a jump scare, but it was short-lived. Why couldn't there have been more of that in the game? The sad thing is, I think there could have been if the game went in a different direction. Now I'm going to quickly wrap up a few things I had to say about the gameplay, then I will explain what I would have done if I was making a Ghostbusters game.
By far the biggest issue with the gameplay is the input lag. Everything you do has a delay to it, and sometimes commands are completely missed, from switching weapons to throwing out the capture trap and dodging. By the way, who dodges like this?
Nimble little minx, isn't she?
Now I'm sure that you've gathered the delay is quite annoying. It basically means that you have to compensate for it before dodging. This can throw your timing off, and don't even bother trying to dodge the flying swarms, because the delay makes it very hard to dodge their bum rush. I just took the hits, or hid away letting them attack the real Ghostbusters while I bravely took pop shots.
That ghost is going down.
This cemetery section shows the ineptitude of the dodging. My god, it's a painful section to complete by yourself on the hardest difficulty.
12 o'clock high. What an asshole.
A minor gripe I had with the controls is the sprinting. Your guy basically has the same sprint from Gears of War, so turning while sprinting is a very gradual thing. In reality, sprinting is pretty useless, as the unresponsive controls in tandem with the button lag often proves that you might as well walk. You're mainly going to want to use the sprint when you want to pick someone up, however it's highly likely that something will be in the way, or the person you need to pick up isn't directly in front of you. This means that by the time the button delay has kicked in and you're sprinted for a millisecond, you're going to have to stop to turn effectively, either to go round the thing that is blocking you or simply to not overshoot your target. Basically, sprinting is useless in most scenarios you'd want to use it in.
The other minor irritation is the AI. On some levels they will constantly get knocked down. This again on hard can be a pain because the AI are a lifeline. Most of the time it's best to pick them up rather than trying to get rid of all of the ghosts. Because if you try dealing with all of the ghosts on your own, it's highly likely that you're going to get knocked down, and if everyone else is down, it's game over. So it's best to play medic. Sometimes this can feel a bit like babysitting, as you will be literally running from one fallen soldier to another. As a general rule, I would advise staying close to them, this way you can pick them up quickly and vice versa. However, this comes with its own issue because when you pick someone up, it's highly likely that you will get hit by whatever knocked them down. This usually means that you're incapacitated and need picking up. The result is a game of one up, one down, until the game gets sick of it and kicks you to a continue screen. Though the game has this flaw, in most aspects it's quite smart, because most of the time your team will use the weapons that a ghost has a weakness to. This saves you time checking it out for yourself. And the AI also prioritises picking you up, rather than fuck-assing about somewhere.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
The final thing I'm going to point out is a good decision made by the developers. Normally in the game, if you get incapacitated too many times, you will fail, regardless if your teammates are still up. However, in boss fights, the amount of times you can be incapacitated before failing is unlimited. This means the only way you can fail a boss fight is by having the whole team incapacitated. This is a much needed mercy, as some of the boss fights would be an absolute nightmare otherwise, because you can easily get caught up in the one up one down game while playing the babysitting medic. And that's all I have to say about the gameplay. I like that there's a decent variety of weapons, and I like how the capture trap works. I also like that they incorporated the PKE, giving it various practical uses like scanning ghosts and their leavings, as well as using it to find hidden artifacts. Overall, as a third-person shooter, it's alright. Fit for purpose is probably the best way I can put it.
Now, if I was in charge of making this Ghostbusters game, I would have done things differently. I would have the player experience the role of a Ghostbuster from a blue-collar perspective. Because the biggest problem I see with the Ghostbusters franchise is writing a new story. But I don't think an apocalyptic scale story is really necessary to make a good Ghostbusters game. That being said, I am going to include this game's story in my own Ghostbusters game to show how my ideas would have benefited the game. But you will see how my game could work without it. So there must be everyday ghosts that aren't linked into some ancient evil, or evil from another dimension. In my game, these ghosts would have a focus. Yes, I am aware that this isn't canon with Ghostbusters, but at the end of the day, it's a game. Now, while I'm talking, I want you to think about the backstories of these ghosts.
So I would focus on multiple stories, which would play out like long branching side quests. The firehouse would be used as a central hub. This is where the player chooses jobs and upgrades their equipment for a research and development section. By using this style of multi-path story structure, each ghost would have the whole level designed around them. This means that time can be spent on their story, level design and unique AI. This level of detail would rid the game of a heavy reliance on trash mobs. I would incorporate each of the main story related ghosts from the current game into the jobs that are called in. I would simply shuffle them in between the garden variety ghosts. This would allow the main story to slowly unveil as the links between the story cases all relate to Gozer. By doing this, the player is given the illusion of choice as they have the option to choose whichever case they want, but naturally they will follow the breadcrumbs that are related to the film. The benefit of spreading out the main story ghosts is that the player would feel that they are in the driving seat, unveiling the links between the ghosts while discovering the severity of what is going on.
Isn't she?
I would also include a natural level cap. This would be due to not having enough resources invested in the R&D. Egon or Ray would advise the newbie that they aren't ready to take a ghost on because they lack powerful enough equipment. This would offer the player progression and give them something to work towards. Though I'd leave the player the option to still go on the level, the main reason for this is because they can collect data for research, with the risk of losing it all if they are incapacitated by the ghost. In the game, each ghost or physical material it leaves can be scanned by the PKE. When enough data is collected, the player will then unlock the ability to buy an upgrade for the weapon which that particular ghost has a weakness for. The player can buy these upgrades by the money they earn from capturing ghosts. The more data a player collects, the more equipment they unlock, and the data they have on a type of ghost helps the player identify varieties from the same ghost type. Think of it like a more varied Pokemon evolution system.
Just like in Pokemon, each ghost would have a basic level which it can evolve from. The more information the player has on the base level ghost, the easier the next evolution would be to identify and capture. So a base level ghost could have 5 evolutions with variants. This Pokemon style system would add an alternative from the more narrative driven ghosts with clear progression. As I would include a chart of ghosts in the firehouse, this would help players track what they have caught. The ghosts that are still out there would be silhouetted on the chart. In the game there would also be rare variants which I will cover in a moment, but the advantage of using the more expanded Pokemon system is that these ghosts wouldn't have a limitation on the number of variants they could have. Now if we were going to be lazy we could simply procedurally generate ghosts from a database. But I wouldn't do that because relying on procedural generation didn't work for No Man's Sky, and for the same reasons the shortcut wouldn't work here. Now I'm going to take a step back and explain how I would incorporate rare ghosts. Basically on the jobs list there would be a quest from Egon or Ray to investigate an area that has been flagged up as showing signs of paranormal activity. This could be a limited time thing, but it is where rare ghosts would appear, and on completion the player gets something unique, either as an upgrade or a cosmetic, as well as obviously knocking them off the chart. Now I'm going to go back even further and explain why this story structure would work so well. As I have said, the structure allows each ghost to be given real attention from a story and gameplay perspective. This focus would also allow the story writer to build intrigue in the ghost before the case is taken on by the details given about it. From a gameplay perspective, imagine the intensity of going around in the dark with the PKE to collect samples on a level which you know there is a powerful ghost on. You know very little about what this ghost looks like or what it can do. All you know is that Egon or Ray told you that if it finds you, you're in big trouble. This kind of risk versus reward element to the game would be great, though the main benefit of the story structure is that it frees up the writer to be as creative as they want. Hell, why limit the player to New York? There are plenty of ghost legends all over the world. Why not let the player travel to capture some of these notorious ghosts? The writers could also include references to films, pop culture, books and serial killers. The possibilities are numerous with the style of story structure. My way of structuring the various narratives would allow more focus on the ghosts being scary, which Ghostbusters, the video game, seriously lacks.
Broadly summarising, the game would be a first-person shooter with branching stories like The Witcher 3. It would include an MCOM-esque research and development component, with some of the ghosts having a more developed Pokemon evolution system. Gameplay wise, the game would put more of an emphasis on investigating with the PKE. This would help build up atmosphere in the levels like Amnesia: The Dark Descent. I think all of these tried and true elements in a Ghostbusters game would really make something special. Well, that's a very brief overview of what I would have done if I was to make a Ghostbusters game. Now it's time to wrap up and give my opinion on if this game is worth buying. I think it's safe to assume that most Ghostbusters fans would have already got this by now, but if you're a fan and you haven't yet bought it, I would say it's worth getting. Just consider the things I've said about the gameplay, story and the length. The game does have local co-op, which is a big plus, but if you're thinking of playing online, you won't have much luck. Well, I couldn't find anyone. Now, I doubt anyone who isn't a Ghostbusters fan would be interested in the game. However, if again you're struggling to find a local co-op game, it's worth getting. Just bear in mind, fundamentally it's a basic third-person shooter, with a few variations from the endless generic third-person shooters that are out there. Just remember that the roughly 7-hour long campaign is going to be shorter if you're playing co-op. The main problem I have with the game is the price. The cheapest I could find the remaster for was 10 quid on a PlayStation sale. Now, if you're just looking for a third-person shooter, you could get Sleeping Dogs, Just Cause 3 or Saints Row 4. All of these games are frequently in the sales for about $3.99 each, so you could get 2 of these with change instead of Ghostbusters, and any one of them offers a better third-person shooter with much more content. I paid 12 quid for a 360 hard copy, and overall I think the game fell short of being value for money. Bit of a shame. Obviously I would feel a bit better if I paid 10 quid for the remaster, because I did get 2 playthroughs out of it. But realistically I think the remaster should be priced at $7.99. And that's somewhat being nice, because let's face facts, if this didn't have the Ghostbusters title, it never would have got a remaster, and it certainly would be in a bargain bin.